All right, today we are jumping headfirst into the spinal cord, and our goal here is to give you a complete masterclass level understanding of this incredibly important part of our nervous system. We're going to cover everything from the big picture structure right down to the specific information superhighways running through it, so you're totally ready for any exam.
So, here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with a high-level overview. Then, we'll look at the spinal nerves, the connections that branch out. After that, we'll peel back the protective layers, dive into the internal anatomy, and trace the major pathways carrying all that information. And we'll wrap it all up with a really key clinical application and a quick summary.
Okay, Section 1, the overview. Let's start by building a solid foundation. We're talking about what the spinal cord is, what its main jobs are, and exactly where it sits in the body.
This image gives us a perfect orientation. You see the brain up top, that's our central command center, and extending down from it, all tucked away and protected inside the vertebral column, is the spinal cord. Think of it as the ultimate communication link. It's a two-way superhighway, sending commands from the brain out to the body and relaying all that sensory information right back up.
Let's get really specific here about its location and functions. So the cord starts at the foramen magnum. That's the big opening at the base of your skull. And it runs all the way down to about the level of the first or second lumbar vertebra. But here's the key. It's not just some passive cable. Oh no. It's an active two-way pathway for both sensory and motor signals. And crucially, it's also a major processing hub for our reflexes.
Now here's something that's actually pretty fascinating. The spinal cord's position actually changes as we grow up. In a tiny 3-month-old fetus, the cord stretches all the way down to the tailbone, the coccyx. By the time a baby is born, it only reaches down to the L3 vertebrae. And in a full-grown adult, it ends even higher, around L1 or L2. And this ascent, as it's called, happens for a simple reason. Our vertebral column just grows a whole lot faster than the spinal cord does. Pretty cool, right?
Okay, before we move on, let's lock in 3 key anatomical terms you've got to know. First up is the conus medullaris. That's the tapered, cone-shaped, very end of the spinal cord. Then, below that, you have the cauda equina. It's Latin for horse's tail, and that's exactly what it looks like. It's this bundle of nerve roots that continue down the canal after the cord itself has ended. And finally, we have the denticulate ligaments. These are little shelves of tissue that stick out sideways and anchor the cord, keeping it nice and stable right in the middle of the spinal column.
Section 2, spinal nerves. So, now that we've looked at the main trunk, let's check out the branches, the spinal nerves that connect the cord to literally everything else in the body.
So how does the spinal cord talk to the body? Well, it communicates through 31 pairs of spinal nerves. These guys are part of the peripheral nervous system, and we group them based on where they exit the vertebral column. So we've got 8 cervical pairs, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 lonely little coccygeal pair.
Now listen up, because there's a super important rule in the neck region, the cervical region, that is absolutely vital for clinical diagnosis. Unlike everywhere else in the spine, the cervical nerves exit above their matching vertebra. For example, the C1 nerve exits above the C1 vertebra. And why does this matter so much? Well, it means that if you have a disc herniation between, say, the C6 and C7 vertebrae, it's actually going to squish the C7 nerve root. Knowing that little rule is absolutely essential for correctly diagnosing nerve impingement.
Okay, Section 3, protective layers and spaces. Now that we've got the cord and its connections down, let's peel back the layers and see how this delicate structure is so well protected.
The spinal cord has got some serious protection. First, you've got the bony armor of the vertebral column. But inside that, there are 3 protective membranes called the meninges. If we work from the outside in, first we have the tough dura mater, then the web-like arachnoid mater, and finally the very delicate pia mater, which basically shrink-wraps the cord itself. And these layers create these really important potential spaces, the epidural, subdural, and subarachnoid spaces.
Now, that subarachnoid space is filled with this amazing fluid called cerebral spinal fluid, or CSF for short. And it's not just filler. This stuff has 4 incredibly important jobs. First, it acts like a shock absorber for the entire central nervous system. Second, it provides buoyancy, which actually makes our heavy brain feel much lighter. Third, it acts like a garbage disposal, removing toxic waste products. And finally, it even helps transport hormones.
All right, Section 4, internal anatomy. Now we're going to go deeper. Let's slice the cord in a cross-section and really look at how it's organized on the inside.
Once you're inside the cord, you immediately see 2 different kinds of nervous tissue. Right there in the center is the gray matter. This is where the neuron cell bodies are. You can think of these as the processors. This is where information gets integrated.
And then surrounding that gray matter is the white matter, which is made up of all the myelinated axons. These are the cables, and their job is to transmit signals up and down the cord.
You can see that the gray matter isn't just a blob, it forms this very distinct H, or, some people say it looks like a butterfly. And this shape is directly tied to its function. The dorsal or back horns of the H are where incoming sensory information gets processed, and the ventral or front horns contain the motor neurons that send commands out to our muscles. It's a really elegant, organized system. Sensory information comes in the back, motor commands go out the front.
Section 5, Major Tracks and Pathways. Now we get to the really cool part. We're going to trace the information superhighway itself. We're going to look at the specific tracks, those bundles of cables, that run through all that white matter.
So the fibers in the white matter are organized into three main types of tracks. You have ascending tracks, which carry sensory info up to the brain. You have descending tracks, which carry motor instructions down from the brain. And you have commissural fibers, which cross from one side of the cord to the other. Now, here's an absolutely crucial point you have to understand. Most of these pathways decussate. That's just a fancy word for crossover. And this is the fundamental reason why the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body, and vice versa.
Okay, let's break down the three major ascending, or sensory pathways. For each one, pay really close attention to its function and where it crosses over. First, there's the spinocerebellar tract. This one handles proprioception. That's our sense of where our body is in space, and it's ipsilateral, meaning it stays on the same side, it doesn't cross. Second is the dorsal column pathway. This carries signals for discriminative touch, and it crosses way up high in the medulla. And finally, we have the spinothalamic tract. This carries pain, temperature, and pressure, and it crosses over right away, at its level in the spinal cord. This diagram is fantastic because it lets us actually trace these totally separate routes, so follow along. Watch the spinocerebellar pathway for proprioception. It zips straight up to the cerebellum, no crossing. Now follow the dorsal column pathway for fine touch. See how it goes all the way up the cord before finally crossing in the medulla. And last, trace the spinothalamic pathway for pain and temperature, and notice how it crosses over almost immediately inside the cord before it starts its journey up to the brain.
Now let's switch gears and look at the signals going down, the descending or motor pathways. We're going to focus on the two main pyramidal tracks that control our voluntary movements. First, the big one, the lateral corticospinal tract. This one manages voluntary movement in our limbs, and it crosses over in the pyramids of the medulla. Then there's the smaller ventral corticospinal tract. It controls the axial muscles of our trunk, and it crosses over much lower down, right at the level of the spinal cord where it's about to exit.
And here's a look at how those motor commands actually travel. The signal starts way up in the primary motor cortex of the brain. It travels down, and right there you can see the majority of those fibers decussate. They cross over in the medulla. These cross fibers then form the lateral corticospinal tract, which continues all the way down to activate our skeletal muscles.
Okay, we're in the home stretch. Section 6, Clinical Application and Summary. Let's take all this detailed anatomy and see how it applies in a real-world clinical setting. Then we'll do a final review to lock it all in.
All of this anatomical knowledge is absolutely critical for procedures like a lumbar puncture, which you probably know as a spinal tap. A needle gets inserted into the subarachnoid space, remember where the CSF is, usually between the L3 and L4 vertebrae. Now, why there specifically? Well, it's because, as we learned, the spinal cord itself ends way up around L1 or L2. So by going in that low, clinicians can safely get a sample of CSF without any risk of hitting and damaging the actual spinal cord. The needle just safely passes through that horse's tail of nerve roots, the cauda equina.
So, to wrap this all up, let's just review the absolute key takeaways. You should now understand the overall organization of the spinal column and the nerves. You should be solid on the cross-section anatomy, the gray and white matter. You should know what's inside the cord, the tracks, the interneurons, the reflex centers. And of course, you should know the names, locations, and functions of those major ascending and descending systems. We've really seen how the spinal cord is this perfectly organized information superhighway, which leads us to a final, critical question to think about. What happens when there's a roadblock on that highway? The answer to that is the very foundation of clinical neurology.